In the spring of 1507, a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller sat in a small printing workshop in the Duchy of Lorraine and made a decision that he would spend the rest of his life trying to reverse. He was finishing a world map, the most ambitious cartographic project attempted in Europe up to that point, printed on 12 separate sheets that would assemble into a wall map roughly 4.5 feet tall and 8 feet wide. The map incorporated the latest Portuguese and Spanish navigational data, the accounts of recent Atlantic crossings, and the theoretical framework of Ptolemy updated with the coastlines that the previous decade of exploration had begun to produce. It needed a name for the landmass that sat between Europe and Asia on the western edge of the known world. A landmass that European cartographers had been trying to fit into their understanding of geography for 15 years without agreeing on what it was or what to call it. Waldseemüller wrote the name America across the southern portion of that landmass, derived from the Latinized version of Amerigo Vespucci's first name, and sent the map to print. He produced 1,000 copies. Within a decade, he understood that the name had been a mistake. He tried to correct it on his next major map. By then, it was too late. The word had already traveled farther than any correction could follow, and the name that the continent had carried before 1507, the name that appears in the documents and correspondence and navigational records of the 15 years between Columbus's first crossing and Waldseemüller's map, had begun its disappearance from the cartographic record in a process so complete that most people today do not know it ever existed. The name that preceded America in the European documentary record was not a single word. It was a collection of terms applied by different navigators from different countries operating under different royal charters with different geographic assumptions about what they had found. Columbus himself never used the word America and never accepted the interpretation of the landmass that the name eventually encoded. He died in 1506, 1 year before Waldseemüller's map was printed, still arguing that the islands and coastlines he had reached were the eastern edge of Asia, specifically the outlying territories of the Chinese Empire described by Marco Polo 2 centuries earlier. His own preferred terminology for what he had found drew from his reading of classical and biblical geography. He referred to the landmass in his later journals as the other world, a term that carried specific theological weight for a man who believed he was fulfilling a prophetic role in the history of Christendom. Spanish royal documents from the period 1493 to 1507 used the phrase Las Indias, the Indies, which encoded Columbus's Asian interpretation into the administrative language of the Spanish crown and persisted in official usage long after the geographic reality had made the term indefensible. Portuguese navigators working the South American coastline used terms that referenced specific features: the land of the true cross, the land of parrots, practical names derived from what they encountered rather than from any theoretical framework about what the landmass was. None of these names had the specificity or the cartographic momentum that Waldseemüller's single printed word would generate. And Waldseemüller knew, within a few years of printing it, that he had made an error, not in the geography, but in the attribution, because the man whose name he had honored had not, as Waldseemüller believed when he wrote the map's accompanying text, been the first European to reach the mainland. And the document that Waldseemüller had relied on to make that determination was, in ways that scholars are still untangling, not what it claimed to be. The document at the center of the attribution problem was a letter, or rather a collection of letters, attributed to Amerigo Vespucci, a Florentine merchant and navigator who had made at least 2 Atlantic crossings in the service of Spanish and Portuguese expeditions between 1499 and 1502. The letters, published in various forms between 1503 and 1507, described Vespucci's voyages in vivid detail and made a claim that Waldseemüller found decisive, that Vespucci had reached the mainland of the western landmass in 1497, 1 year before Columbus reached the South American coast on his 3rd voyage, and a full year before John Cabot's English-sponsored crossing reached the North American mainland. If the 1497 date was accurate, Vespucci had priority. He was the first European to set foot on the continental landmass, and naming the continent after him was not vanity. It was cartographic convention, which held that new territories were named after their discoverers. Waldseemüller accepted the date and printed the name. The problem, which became apparent to scholars within decades and has been a subject of historical argument ever since, is that the 1497 voyage almost certainly did not happen. The documentary evidence for a Vespucci expedition in that year is thin, contested, and inconsistent with the administrative records of the Spanish crown, which show no authorized expedition matching the one Vespucci described departing in the spring of 1497. The letter that contains the 1497 claim, known as the Soderini letter, after the Florentine official to whom it was addressed, exists in multiple versions with significant textual variations, suggesting that the published text had been edited, possibly substantially, before it reached print. By whom, for what purpose, and with whose authorization is not established in the surviving record. Waldseemüller figured out enough of this by 1513 to act on it. His next major map, the Carta Marina published that year, removed the name America from the landmass entirely and replaced it with the phrase Terra Incognita, unknown land, along the South American coast where the name had originally appeared. On his 1516 map, the Carta Marina's revision, the landmass is labeled with Portuguese and Spanish territorial designations rather than any proper name. Waldseemüller never publicly explained the change or wrote about why he had removed the name. His correspondence from this period, what survives of it, does not address the question directly. Historians have inferred his reasoning from the cartographic evidence alone. He stopped using the name, which in the context of a man who had introduced it to an audience of 1,000 printed copies suggests he had concluded it was wrong, but the copies were already in circulation. They had already been copied by other cartographers who had not waited for Waldseemüller's correction before incorporating the name into their own work. The 1507 map itself disappeared from the historical record entirely for nearly 4 centuries. No copy was known to exist until 1901, when a single surviving example was found in a German castle, which meant that the name spread through the cartographic tradition without its source document being available for scrutiny. By the time anyone could examine the original map carefully, the name had been on every European map of the Western Hemisphere for roughly 100 years, and the question of whether it should have been there at all was entirely academic. The cartographic tradition that followed Waldseemüller treated the name as settled almost immediately. Gerardus Mercator, whose 1538 world map applied the name America to both the northern and southern landmasses for the first time. Waldseemüller had only used it on the south, did so without any apparent awareness that the original cartographer had tried to retract it. Mercator's maps became the standard reference for European navigation across the 16th century and beyond, and the name went where the maps went, which was everywhere. The question of what the continent should have been called, if not America, has several possible answers, depending on which framework of discovery priority you accept and which navigator's claim you find credible. The most straightforward alternative, argued by historians who accept Columbus's Caribbean landings as the relevant first contact, regardless of whether he reached the mainland, is that the continent should carry some form of Columbus's name. Columbia, which did eventually become the name of a district, a river, a South American nation, and several dozen American cities, but never the continent itself. The name Columbia appeared in American political writing as early as the 1730s as a poetic designation for the colonies and later the new republic, and it was used with enough consistency through the Revolutionary period that some historians have argued it was a genuine alternative in competition with America for the role of continental designation. It lost, but not by much, and not inevitably. A different set of printing decisions in the 1490s and 1500s, a Waldseemüller who had better source documents or more time to verify the Soderini letter before going to press, and the Western Hemisphere might be called something entirely different today. The name you use for the place you live, and by extension, your identity as a person from that place, rests in part on a cartographic error made by a German printer in Lorraine in 1507 who tried to fix it 6 years later and failed because the correction could not travel as fast as the mistake. The surviving copy of the 1507 Waldseemüller map is now in the Library of Congress. The United States purchased it from the German family that had held it since the 1901 discovery, paying $10 million in 2003, the highest price ever paid for a single map at that point. It is displayed under controlled atmospheric conditions to prevent further deterioration. You can look at it. The word America is visible on the southern landmass in Waldseemüller's typeface, applied to a geography that is recognizable but distorted in the way that all pre-survey cartography is distorted. The coastlines approximated, the interiors guessed at, the proportions wrong, in ways that the cartographer had no way to correct, because no European had yet traveled the interior to measure it. The name sits on the map the way a mistake sits in a published book that has already shipped. Visible, permanent, impossible to recall from the copies already in the world. Waldseemüller put it there in the spring of 1507 and spent years trying to take it back. The continent kept the name. The map that introduced it vanished for 400 years. When it came back, nobody was in a position to do anything about what was written on it. If something in this video landed differently than you expected, the 1513 map that removed the name and explained nothing, the Soderini letter that may have been edited before anyone saw it, the $10 million purchase of a cartographer's mistake, drop it in the comments and tell us the specific moment. Not a general reaction. The thing that actually stopped you. The people in this comment section carry knowledge that the video doesn't have room for, and those conversations consistently go further than anything we scripted. If your research has ever taken you into colonial cartography, early navigation records, or the paper trail of how geographic names move through history, bring what you found. We want to know. Subscribe if you want to be here when we keep pulling this thread, and we are very much still pulling it.